Hello, this is Joan Fernley, your French diction coach for choirs, and today I will be reading the French folk song V'là le bon vin. Now, as is the case with these old folk songs, there are many textual variations out there. So I picked what I think are perhaps the most common set of lyrics that you would find in folk song collections and in choral arrangements. Now, my plan is to have a two-part video series on this song. The first video is this video, which is all about the diction, and the second video will be all about the origins of the song, history, cultural context, and so on. But that still needs a bit more research, and it'll be a little bit of time before I'll be able to put out this video. But do check back in, because once it's posted, I will post the link in the description box below. Of course, if you like, share, and subscribe, you're more likely to see it pop up on your feed. And of course, if you are working on a French song that is giving you a bit of trouble and you would love it if I could tackle it, well, I would love that too. So post that in the comments and I will add it to my list of French songs. So this video, all about diction, will be in three parts. The first part is the reading, where I just simply read the text as if I were singing it. The second part is 3 tips for conductors and singers. And the third part, if you want to keep working with me, it's the coaching session where I just go line by line right through the song. So now, without any further delay, let's get started. For the purpose of this reading, I will begin with the refrain followed by all the verses. V'là le bon vin, v'là le joli vin. V'là le bon vin, mamie m'appelle. V'là le bon vin, v'là le joli vin. V'là le bon vin, mamie m'attend. Derrière chez nous y a un étang. 3 beaux canards s'en vont baignant. Le fils du roi s'en va chassant avec son grand fusil d'argent. Visa le noir, tua le blanc. Ô fils du roi, tu es méchant d'avoir tué mon canard blanc. Par des soulets, il perd son sang. Par les yeux lui sortent des diamants, et par le bec l'or et l'argent. Toutes ces plumes s'en vont au vent, 3 dames s'en vont les ramassant. C'est pour en faire un lit de camp, pour y coucher tous les passants. Your first tip is the sound and that's simply a nasalized version of the sound ah. Now the sound ah is in the middle. It's neither too dark, ah, which is something that I will hear sometimes in English choirs, but it's neither too bright. It's not ah either. So it's really somewhere in the middle. It's a very comfortable ah. And to get the nasalized effect, it's simply that the soft palate drops ever so slightly, air goes through the nose, and you get the ah effect, the nasalized effect. Now, I spoke extensively about the nasalized vowels in my Cantique de Jean Racine, and I highly recommend that you watch that video, and the link will be down in the description. But let's focus on the sound, because that is your rhyme for the entire song. Every line of the song ends with the sound So how do you know that you have an sound? Well, that begins with the letter A or E, followed by an N or an M. That's your first clue, either of those 4 patterns. But it's not always nasalized because you have the word canard. And canard, the N is followed by a vowel. And so that's your clear sign that it will not be a nasalized sound at the beginning. It will simply be canard. But as I mentioned, every line of this song ends with the sound And I've just posted up a few words, étang, blanc, vent, diamant, and so on. They all end with consonants. And so that's your clear signal that you have an sound. Now, I sort of lied because I do want to talk about the word bon, which is a nasalized version of the O sound. And the reason is because it's very tempting in this refrain, and I've heard it done, is to sing v'là le bon vin, and the N being pronounced. And that is a mistake, and it does stand out. So, and you repeat this many times. This is the refrain, and it's repeated many times in the refrain. So this is a word that is well worth spending some time on. So the N is never pronounced. The N is just there to give a color to the O. So think of the ON as a unit. And if your choir is having trouble not closing the N and they still close the N, simply practice Vlalbova. Just practice that for a while to get out of the habit of pronouncing the N. And the other option too is simply writing a little X in your scores just to have a visual reminder not to pronounce that N. This brings me right into tip number 2, which is your final consonants, those consonants at the end of words. And in French, for the most part, those consonants are silent. So if there's one trick you were to remember from this video, it's this. When in doubt, take them out. Now, this is a cheat. You are playing a trick on your audience. But what happens sometimes is that the brain will fill in the blanks. So if you leave a consonant out and you have a few francophones in your audience, they may fill in the blanks with the correct consonant. But if you put an incorrect consonant, you're advertising a mistake. So if you don't believe me, let's have a look at the lyrics. So these are all the lyrics of the song. And out of those words, you have all these words that have final consonants. But out of those, only these have vocalized final consonants. So you have very few. There is the letter R that comes at the end of a lot of words, and very often the R in French is pronounced, but it doesn't carry very well. A rolled R is not always perceptible, especially in a quick song. So you could drop them. It's not correct, but you might get away with it. Now let's take those out, and you're left with 5 words that come up in this song where you would really want to focus. But if you didn't know what to do, I would still advise you to drop them to avoid mistakes. So let's have a look at these lines and focus first on fils and il. So it's correct to say fils and to say il. Fils, regardless if you have one son or if you have a dozen sons, it will always be an S at the end. It's just one of those words you just need to learn. But if you were to remove the S, it would be wrong, but you might get away with it by saying le fils du roi. And it goes by so quickly that your audience might fill in the blanks. Same thing for il. It goes by very quickly, and you would have par-dessous l'aile, il perd son sang. And actually, that's how a lot of people speak. A lot of francophones drop the L. They'll say par-dessous l'aile, il perd son sang. So is it correct? Is it incorrect? It's up to you. But to do proper French, yes, you would pronounce the L. But the reason I'm suggesting that you drop them if you're not sure is the word fusil. And I've heard that pronounced fusil. And that is a mistake that you're just advertising to the world, because that is very jarring for a francophone to hear fusil. So if you're not sure, drop it and you'll cover your bases. If your choir is not getting it, just have them stick that X in there and take the L out. Now the word avec and bec, that C is pronounced. But again, you could get away with it. Just drop the C if you're not sure. The audience will hear avec son grand, and it'll just go by very quickly. Because if you get it wrong in the other way and you get blanc and you put an C at the end, it's blanc, and that is completely wrong in French. The C is not pronounced, and in this case, it has to rhyme with the rest of the song, which ends in en. So again, pull out that pencil and put an X on that C. But you see the difference. You will get more success if you're unsure by dropping consonants than by adding them in. So when in doubt, take them out. Your third tip is all about fast singing, and this applies to any language, but of course there's an added layer of difficulty when it's a language you're less familiar with. So your first step is to get very familiar with your words, and you do this independently of the music. Basically, you look at them on a daily basis. You do a little bit every day, and don't underestimate this process, and even consider memorizing the whole thing or just the key passages where you might have page turns. Now, assuming you've done this work, let's talk about vocal production. And there's actually 4 points that I want you to keep in mind for the vocal production when you're singing fast. There's tension, there's volume, there's articulation, and there's breath. And they're all connected, but we'll just break it down one at a time. The first thing, when you're working hard, there will be tension. Working on words is a cerebral activity, and you're working hard, and the shoulders will go up, and you will compromise your body singing activity. So the body needs to be relaxed. You need to take away the tension. Now, if you're working on the words at home, you can do what I do. I learn my words horizontally. Not all the time, but I have done this very often. I just lie on the couch and I just practice my words that way. And the reason is simply because I can get in a very relaxed state when I'm horizontal. Or you can go outside in the backyard if it's nice and sunny and warm, but just put yourself in a situation where tension is less likely to creep in. So just be very mindful of that tension. The second thing is when the faster we sing, the louder we get. It's like a reflex. And you want to mindfully take away that volume because you're robbing yourself of energy that will help you go fast. So you want to think of them as opposites. The faster it is, the softer you want it to be. So really dial it back on the volume. If you're singing too loudly, you are working too hard. And this brings me to the third point, which is articulation. You don't want to overpronounce your words. And in fact, practice your words with a very small mouth opening, just like the beginning of a kiss. Tiny, tiny, just like this, and you practice your words and focus on the action of your tongue at the very front. And it's that old expression, the tip of the tongue, the teeth, and the lips, and just put all the words right in that tiny, tiny space. Look at yourself in the mirror. You barely want to move. You want all that action to be the tip of the tongue, the teeth, and the lips. And this brings me to the fourth point. When you practice your lines, connect them to the breath. So connect them to an exhale. Take one line and breathe out that line. So if I take the first line of the song, of the lyrics, I would take a breath in and I would say, Derrière chez nous y a un étang. Now, if I can do two lines on one breath, I will do that. And I will gauge it according to the choral arrangement that I happen to be singing and where the breaths actually are in the score. And you want to connect all those words to that breath. But you can only do that kind of work if there's no tension. And so you can think of this as a circle. All of these parts are connected. Okay, so it's time for the coaching session. Thank you for sticking around. So I will begin with the refrain followed by all the lyrics. And in the refrain, we tackled a lot of the sounds. So we have the bon, which you should remember not to pronounce the N. And of course, we have the vent, the sound. So we worked on those already. But what I want to bring your attention to is the first word, v'la, which is a contraction. And then you have le bon. And that can be really awkward at first. You sort of don't know where to emphasize things. So here's what you do. You stick the L of le bon, stick it on the v'la. Because most of the time, v'la le bon vent has a lot of momentum. Those choral arrangements, they really like to play up the momentum of the wind. So what you want to do is v'la le bon vent. So you want to stick the L on v'la and it will give you a momentum. Of course, I don't know what choral arrangement you're looking at, but most of the time this should really work. V'la le bon vent, v'la le joli vent. Now at the end of the second line, you have ma, mi, m'appelle. So very clean, ma, mi. And then the word m'appelle, you have a double P. And again, if you want to emphasize the momentum in this song, you can emphasize the double P as in Italian, where you would do m'appelle. And that is completely correct in French, and it really gives a lot of momentum and propels you into the third line. Mamie m'appelle. Now at the end of the fourth line, you have the word matin, means waiting for me. And in this case, I wouldn't emphasize the double T simply because it's the end of the refrain. Now moving on to the lyrics. You have derrière chez nous y a un étang. So the sounds are actually quite simple. There's the eh sound on derrière. Now you don't want to overemphasize the mouth, not derrière. Otherwise it just sounds a little off. Derrière. You want to open it up. Chez, don't pronounce that final consonant. Chez nous. And every time you see an oo sound, think of an owl. Hoo, hoo. Derrière chez nous. So very high up and just make it very much like an owl. Just have that image in your mind. And then ya, very straightforward. Ta. Now, is a nasalized vowel, and it's the version of as in œuf, an egg in French. Un. So it's the same process of dropping the soft palate, letting some air through the nose, and then you get the nasalized effect. So make sure you've got the sound and then nasalize it. And then that N is actually pronounced because it is tied to the word that follows. So this is, it's an exception where you have to do what's called a liaison, where you tie the words together. And that's where ending those final consonants actually are sounded when you do that liaison. But it's the only time where that happens. Derrière chez nous y a un étang. In the next line, trois beaux canards s'en vont baignant. So at the very beginning, you have the wa sound, but you also have tr, and now you have an option. You can either do what I've been doing in this video, which is trois, which is rolled in the throat. It's called grassiller, or you can roll it on the tip of the tongue, trois. Now, in classical singing, sort of the traditional singing, you would definitely roll your R's on the tip of the tongue. But in folk singing, all bets are off. You can do whatever you like. You can do it here, or you can do it on the tip of the tongue. Of course, it's going to depend on your space. So the conductor may request that the R is rolled on the tip of the tongue, and it's just a light flip. Now, in my videos, I always do them in the throat simply because it trips me up when I'm talking to roll on the tip of my tongue. But I'm just putting that out there so you keep that in mind. You can definitely roll on the tip of the tongue, and many times it's very appropriate. But I will keep doing it in my throat when I'm speaking because it's so much easier. So you have the wa sound. So you go straight into the a. Trois, trois. Beau. So you have lots of letters, but it's only an o sound. Beau. Canard. So it's a nice open a sound. Sans. You have that en sound. Vont. Just like bon. Baignant, baignant. So it's an e sound, just like derrière. So I'll say the whole line. Trois beaux canards s'en vont baignant. Le fils du roi s'en va chassant. So that word fils is coming up. So that S is definitely pronounced, but the L is silent because we're talking about the king's son, the prince. Le fils. And then you have du, and the sound U is not present in the English language. So it really trips up singers. So what you want to do is start with the E sound, and it comes right before anyway, fils. So hang on to that E sound, and what you'll do is wrap around the E, pucker around it, and you get U. E, U. The tongue doesn't move. If you can get E, you can get U. It's just something you need to build into your habits. Le fils du. And this is another reason why it's really worthwhile practicing with a small opening when you're practicing your words so that you don't overextend and pull down those vowels. Le fils du roi. And then you can open up on that. S'en va chassant. These are sounds we've already seen. The next line, avec son grand fusil d'argent. So avec has a good C and you want to emphasize it. These are not the tips to get away with tricking your audience. In this case, if you really want to get it right, put the C in. Son, just like bon, grand, fusil. Very difficult word to pronounce because you've got the U and you'll be tempted to say the L. So make sure you don't say fou and make sure you don't say zeal. Fusil, completely wrong. Fusil. Very little movement in the lips. D'argent. Avec son grand fusil d'argent. Visa le noir, tua le blanc. So the word noir has an R that you have to roll at the end to really pronounce correctly. Visa le noir. And pronounce that R. Tua. Tricky one. You don't want to say tua. And there's no W sound. It's tua. Practice those separately. Tua. And then put them together quickly. Tua. Le blanc. And again, don't pronounce that C. It's just an A sound. Ô fils du roi, tu es méchant. So these are all sounds you've heard already. Ô fils du roi, tu es méchant. D'avoir tué mon canard blanc. Now, the trickiest word in this line is tuer, because you have two challenges. You have the A sound, and there's no diphthong on A, but Anglophones will often put in A. So you really want to think of it as a vowel that is very dry. It just stops to A. A. There's no extra y's on the end. To A. If it's held a long time, you have to freeze it into that sound. To A. A. Not to A. But if you don't get your U right, you'll get to A. And that will sound far too English. Tu es, just like you practice tu as, tu es, and really focus. Practice those because it will trip you up, guaranteed. D'avoir tué mon canard blanc. The rest you've seen before. Par-dessous l'île perd son sang. So the word dessous, e and ou, dessous, l'aile. Now, sometimes in other contexts, you might say l'aile, but in this context, it is tied to the next word that follows, l'île perd. So you connect all of that. It's called the liaison. Par-dessous l'île perd. The R is rolled, but the D is silent. Perd son sang. Par-dessous l'aile, il perd son sang. And then, par les yeux, lui sortent des diamants. So the word par, you've seen it before. Les, it's a nice S sound, and yeux. So there's a Z that comes before there's a Z sound. So it's just like saying Z, and then you add the E sound. So it's a bit like starting with an sound and then closing it up a bit. Yeux. So work backwards, start with the and then add the z in front. Par les yeux, lui, tricky word, ui. Make sure they're very clean, practice them separately. Lui. And then here you have the word sorte. And actually that's a contraction. That apostrophe replaces an E. It has two syllables normally, sorte, but because it's fast, we smush it together and we have sorte. And you'll get a little T sound at the end because normally it would be sorte. So sorte des diamants. And when you say diamant, be careful not to say diamant. It's one sort of beginning of the word. You go dia, not dia. There are songs where the I and the following vowel are actually pronounced separately. You might have diamant in a solo song or something like that. But in this case, you treat it as a consonant, as a y sound. Dia, diamant. Et par le bec, l'or et l'argent. So you pronounce all your R's, l'or et l'argent. So I've exaggerated the R so you can hear it, but it's just a flip. Et par le bec. Pronounce that. See? L'or et l'argent. And you do connect or and et, l'or et l'argent. You make that connection. So much easier to sing when you connect your words. And French allows you to do that. Then you get toutes ces plumes s'en vont au vent. So you have the oo sound. Ooh. Think of the owl. Toutes ces plumes. Now be sure not to pronounce that S. The word is actually, again, there's a contraction there and the E has been taken out. It's actually plume. So be sure not to say plumes. And you do have an S that follows, so it can really trip you up. Plumes s'en vont, nice and open, vont au vent. You want to connect that. And then the second line, trois dames s'en vont les ramassant. And again, dame, which means ladies, we've taken the E out and put the apostrophe. So it should be dame, but in this song we say dame. Don't pronounce the S. Trois dames s'en vont les ramassant. C'est pour en faire un lit de camp. So you have a lot of connection in the words. C'est pour en faire un lit de camp. Of course, I'm exaggerating. Don't do that when you sing it. You have the OO sound. C'est pour en faire, an E sound. Lit de cas. So li, the T is not pronounced. And then pour y coucher tous les passants. So you've got a lot of oohs. So if you're ever going to get the oohs right, put it on that line because you've got 3 of them. Pour y coucher tous les passants. Well, there you have it. V'là le bon vent. Thank you for watching. Keep practicing your French, and until next time, bye!